It is generally reckoned that 1 in every 3 women in Victorian England had been employed as a domestic servant at some point in their working lives, with data from the 1851 census showing that 40% of the female workforce were employed in this way. Indeed, between 1851 and 1871, the number of female servants grew at twice the rate of population growth. The reason for this growth in domestic servants has been attributed to the increase in middle-class households over the course of the 19th century. Women of the middle class expected themselves to be free from mundane domestic responsibilities, so many employed servants to cook, clean and take care of their children. For the employer, women were considerably cheaper to employ than men, and by the mid-19th century there was only 13 men for every 100 women employed in the domestic sphere. A prosperous household would have employed a great many servants, all of whom would perform strictly departmentalised duties, such as the kitchen maid, the parlour maid, the lady's maid, the children's nurse, the cook, the housekeeper and the tweenie, that being a maid of all work. The romanticised image of a domestic servant is of a young unmarried woman, neatly dressed and wearing a crisply ironed clean white apron, scurrying soundlessly around in a large country mansion. However, for most women in domestic service, this was rarely the case. The burgeoning middle class of 19th century Britain became the largest employer of domestic servants, and in most cases these middle class houses employed just one servant, known as a slavery. For those employed in this way, the departmentalisation of household duties was dispelled and all duties fell to the one servant. Pay for domestic servants varied depending on what job they did and where they were located, with some larger houses even paying variable rates depending on the season. For those fortunate to be employed in a large, well-run household, the whole of their payments became disposable income, since accommodation, food and other necessities were provided to them by their employer. For some domestic servants, it then proved possible to spend very little and then have substantial savings by the time they married and left service. Although those employed as a slavery received substantially less than those in larger houses, the attraction to such a position was the perceived opportunities for social mobility. Additionally, domestic service was thought to provide a greater opportunity to marry well, as respectable working class men often preferred to marry servants who were trained in domestic skills and thus it was thought made better wives. However, this notion of social mobility was not necessarily played out in the real world. Marriage records from the late 19th century show that former domestic servants, despite their social aspirations, did not marry outside of the class to which they were born. Although oral testimonies do state that with their own children, former domestic servants were particular about table manners, place settings and other social graces. And although domestic service was seldom perfect, for many working class girls it did provide them with a standard of living that would have been otherwise inaccessible.